Welcome to the Moxie OT podcast, where we invite occupational therapy practitioners, consumers, and friends of OT to talk about evidence-based practice. Today we'll be talking to Rachel Vaughn, an occupational therapist, about using client-centered goals with the pediatric population. Rachel helps us think critically about why client-centered goals are important and how our goals guide our interventions. Let's meet Rachel. Today we're going to talk with Rachel Vaughn about client-centered goals, and more specifically, how and why OTs should use client-centered goals when working with pediatric populations. Rachel's a friend of mine. We met working together in day rehab at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. She's moving on to bigger things and is currently a PhD student at the University of North Carolina. Rachel, welcome to the Moxie OT podcast.
Thanks for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
It's so great that you're here. Rachel, you and I worked together for a few years, but while I preferred working with adults, most of the time you were working with clients of all ages. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I've been an occupational therapist for 6 years, working with people of all ages, as you said. I was in Chicago for 5 years working at Shirley Ryan, and then I worked as a travel occupational therapist for about a year in California. And as I was working as a travel OT, I was mostly working in nursing homes. At Shirley Ryan, I worked full-time in day rehab, and I picked up occasional shifts at the main hospital. I love working with all ages, but pediatrics have always been my passion area.
Yeah, you're so good at bringing the energy to those kiddos. Those are challenging sessions.
Yeah, I try. Some days are better than others. Depends on how much coffee I have.
Well, I'm not a peds person, but we're both passionate about client-centered goals. What got you interested in that topic?
During OT school and any continuing education course I went to, the instructors were always talking about the importance of client-centered goals and client-centered practice. But I was noticing that during my practice, it appeared that kids were being told what they needed to work on more so than them actually being part of that process of identifying what is most important to them. Parents want what is best for their child, but I was interested in really giving some autonomy to the kiddos. Kids have interests and desires, and I wanted to incorporate their perspective into a goal to be addressed during therapy.
Yeah, that can be challenging because I think often as OTs and parents, like we know so much of what kids could or should be doing. We have so much information as far as like their grade levels and developmental milestones, and we want them to be able to participate in school and do their ADL. So there's already so many goals that we could be working on, maybe should be working on. So, it's very easy for someone to go, well, why do I need another tool? Or why do I need to worry about being client-centered? I know the kid needs to be able to participate in school.
Yeah, and it's also tricky because especially in the setting of day rehab, we have to keep insurance in mind, and we have to write goals that the payers are going to pay for. So keeping that in mind is also a tricky thing whenever it comes to certain goals, because you know that the payers want to see progress with ADLs and things like that.
Absolutely. Sometimes we have to maybe think creatively about how to write our goals so that we're meeting both of those needs, those of the child, the family, and the payers as well. What about motivation? How does that play a role in the need for client-centered goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think that being creative in how you address a goal can be really helpful for both kids and adults. Kids might not be interested in ADLs in the traditional sense, but if you put the concept of an ADL into a client-centered context, then kids may be on board and see the importance. Motivation is really key. So for example, a teenager who had a spinal cord injury wants to go on a day trip to with a friend's family. Being able to go on this trip without their mom and dad is the goal because parents are embarrassing, according to teenagers. And however, in order to go on the trip, the teenager needs to be able to complete intermittent cathing without assistance. And they need to manage their clothes, and they need to be able to safely complete a car transfer and be able to break down their wheelchair and all those other endless tasks that go into going on an outing. And even if they can't do them independently, they need to be able to direct someone on how to do those tasks for them if they don't want their parent or their primary caregiver to be there with them. So, in working towards the long-term goal of going on a day trip with a friend, it opens up the opportunities for client-centered short-term goals as well, which will likely address those developmental and ADL areas that the OTs commonly address during treatment.
Yeah, that's such a great example of how important context can be in both goal writing and interventions. You know, if you tell a kiddo or an adult sometimes you need to work on dressing, you know, an adult may be totally fine with a family member helping them or a caregiver helping them with dressing at home, but again, they may need to go on a business trip or they may want to go visit a family member across the country, and suddenly ADLs become much more motivating, and just changing the context can do a lot. I think you also once had an example of a kiddo who wanted to be able to put on their baseball uniform.
Yeah, yeah, they were part of an adaptive sports league and they wanted to be able to go on an away game. But in order to go on the away game, you have to be able to do like get dressed and all those things by yourself. So he wanted to be able to put on his uniform by himself.
Yeah, so once again, you're still working on ADLs, but you change that context, they're so motivated. I love it. So you actually worked on a research study at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab where you studied the use of 2 pediatric outcome measures that helped focus client. I'm going to start that one over. Okay. So you actually worked on a research study at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab where you studied the use of 2 pediatric outcome measures that focused on client-centered goals and the benefits of those tools. First, can you tell us about what those outcome measures were?
Yeah, I utilized the CAPE PAC, which is short for the Children's Assessment of Participation and Enjoyment, the CAPE, and its partner tool Preferences for Activities of Children, the PAC. They can be used separately, but for my project, we used both parts together. And whenever they're combined, they become an occupation-based tool for assessing 55 non-school-based activities across a domains of participation, categories of recreation and leisure. I'm just gonna start that over. I was stumbling. Okay. I utilized the CAPE PAC, which is short for the Children's Assessment of Participation and Enjoyment, the CAPE, and its partner tool, Preferences for Activities of Children, the PAC. Together, they can be used separately, but for my project, we use both parts. Together, they are an occupation-based tool for assessing 55 non-school-based activities across domains of participation, categories of recreation and leisure, and activity types for children with and without disabilities. They measure innate participation and not levels of assistance or equipment required for an activity. And so like they're 2 separate tools, but again, I was using them together. So the CAPE looks at what activities kids are doing, where they're doing activities, who they're doing activities with, how often are they participating, as well as do they like what they're doing. And then the PAC is a card sorting task, which explores activities kids are interested in doing if they can do anything in the whole world. I selected the CAPE PAC because it can be used for ages 6 to 21, could feasibly be used with the complex patients being seen in day rehab, and because it could easily be used with kiddos who had not yet returned to school. A lot of pediatric participation assessments are based in school contexts, and in day rehab, most kids are still receiving intensive therapies and they haven't returned to school yet. And usually they do by the end of the stay in day rehab, but sometimes they still have more work to do.
Well, and school doesn't need to be the only goal we ever work on. And especially, I know, you know, school-based therapists, they have certain goals that they need to focus on. But, you know, certainly in day rehab, we have the whole world we need to think about. So I think that the CAPE PAC is a really cool tool. I get to practice it with my students at the university. And I love that it's picture-based. For the adult therapists out there, I sort of think about it as the activity card sort for kids. So it's cool. But 55 activities is so many cards to get through. I know you also have some great strategies to help facilitate getting through the whole assessment with kids that can sometimes be pretty squirmy, have limited attention spans.
Yeah, if needed, we broke the activities into chunks. So maybe responding to 10 activities and then going to do an obstacle course 3 times and then coming back to do another set of activities for the cards. And we also were able to complete it with some kiddos while they were like bouncing on a ball or lying prone on elbows over a wedge. Just changing up the positioning during the administration improved a kiddo's ability to attend to the task. There were a few times we did the cape and pack on separate days or even kind of throughout the day, depending on how long kiddos were there during the day. And day rehab, some kids are there for just 2 hours getting therapy. Some are there for up to 6 hours during the day.
Those are all great ideas and strategies, and sometimes we can incorporate those into our adult practice too. Sometimes when patients are in a setting for a physical rehabilitation, it can be hard for them to buy into sitting down and doing an assessment. And when we've studied these assessments and we've seen their worth, we understand that as occupational therapists, but when they really want to get stronger and improve their endurance and all of these things, that can be difficult. So if you can incorporate some form of movement, that might help the parent buy into the session, or the child, or the adult in a different setting. So I think, and I'm sure you were also thinking about tapping into their sensory systems and helping them concentrate and
Yeah,
all
helping
those
with
great
that.
things.
And also, I can't sit still for long periods without having to fidget and having to go do things. So I think keeping that in mind is just a good thing in general, because it's hard to
Absolutely.
sit still and
I'm
pay attention to one thing for a long period. So,
I'm sure those that watch these videos notice I'm always twisting in this seat here. So I'm
I know
never
I'm on a
sitting
swivel
still.
chair and I'm really trying to not do that.
Oh. Well, that's so great. I think it's an assessment that's definitely worth exploring, just for the breadth of activities and thinking about activities outside of those that we normally think about when we think about kiddos. Um, and then the other part of your study was to look at how the goals were being addressed with these kiddos changed. So, what were your findings?
Yeah, so I did a retrospective chart review for kids from the previous year, and then I compared that to the group who was then identifying a client-centered goal after participating in the CAPE pack. Both groups contain goals for improving independence with their basic ADLs and be more independent with completing household chores and just activities around the house, as well as returning to school, because that's always the goal with day rehab is we want kids to get back to school. And then the retrospective group contained goals for improving upper extremity functioning as evidenced by changes on outcome measures like grip strength, the 9-hole peg test, or box and blocks test. Instead of outcome measure goals, however, the client-centered goals group focused on improving participation, social interaction, and exploring new activities. I went and I pulled a couple examples of goals. So from the retrospective group, a pretty common theme of a goal was a patient will increase functional use of their bilateral upper extremity during activities as evidenced by an increase in 15 pounds of grip strength for each hand. So it has that functional piece and just pulling in that outcome measure. And then when looking at the client-centered group, a couple of the goals were patient will demonstrate sufficient balance and endurance to stand for 10 minutes unsupported while playing with a dog to increase independence in preferred activities. This kiddo had a dog at home and really wanted to get back to helping to be able to take care of their dog.
How motivating is that? That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And then another kiddo, their goal was to increase participation in play and social interaction with peers, participating in climbing and utilizing equipment on the playground with friends. So just getting back to some of those more like kid-focused activities.
And occupation based, right? Like, yeah, function was listed in that first goal you read, but I didn't really hear occupation. And, as a covering therapist, what do I do with that goal? I don't know. So,
Yeah, and I just really like that the client-centered goals, they really like the kids were selecting goals that were emphasizing socialization and just general participation in doing things that are just important to kids. Like the kids probably want their arms to get stronger and better, yeah, but they don't really care like, oh, I can squeeze like this much more now than I could however long ago. They want to be able to squeeze hard enough that they can like hang from the monkey bars. So
Right. And when we think about, motivation for participation, both in life and in therapy, like if you are incorporating the monkey bars into therapy versus squeezing the therapy or Play-Doh, if it, you're going to be a lot more motivated if it's the thing that you really want to do, that you see the other kids doing, that, and you're going to have more fun in therapy, but probably both the kid and the therapist.
yeah. And I do think sometimes therapists feel like they have to completely like rewrite every single therapy session every single time because like, oh, well, we did Play-Doh yesterday, so the kid probably doesn't want to play Play-Doh again. But if Play-Doh's the kid's favorite game ever, like they're going to play with Play-Doh every day. I just think of kids at school who are at recess. Kids tend to have the same things that they go do every time they go out to recess. There are some kids who are always going to be going down the slide. There are other kids who are always hanging out on the swing set. There are other kids who are always playing kickball. So kids like doing those things that they want to do. So why not let them do it every day if that's what's really motivating to them?
Yeah, and they'll let you know too. That's the
Yeah.
other great thing about kids. They'll let you know, like, I'm tired of monkey bars. Can we do,
Yeah.
the something else today? I was trying to think of, you already described it earlier, but when they run around and go over different things.
Obstacle course.
The obstacle course. I totally
Yeah.
lost that word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no
So
one more honest than a kid. Like they're going to tell you.
yeah.
So
Versus an adult who will just do it and then stop coming to therapy.
yes, very true.
So do you feel that this study and looking at those goals changed anything in your practice?
I think it was a really great way to emphasize a patient's voice. I began working as a travel OT shortly after completing my project, but the experience really helped me see the importance and benefit of client-centered goals in practice and just how clinicians approach an activity can impact the patient's desire to participate. And I was able to carry this over into my practice in skilled nursing facilities. So,
Yeah, that's, client-centered goals are important for kiddos, but they're important for all of us in any area of practice to think about. So
yes,
that's
definitely.
so important. I do think that there have been times in my practice where I've sort of gotten into a rut, and many of my clients have had similar goals. And when I when I've incorporated different assessments that have helped me think more client-centeredly, it's definitely been a big help.
Yeah.
Do you have a particular patient or case in mind that you think about, that this this assessment it really made a change in their intervention plan?
I don't know if it's like one patient in particular, but there were several parents who were really excited about the goal that their child selected. And I think the plans of care for the middle schoolers and high schoolers were more influenced by the client centered goals. Those kids, they just have a little bit more sense of self as they get a little bit older. But I do know there was one kid who wanted to play a musical instrument but had deficits in hand dexterity bilaterally. So their OT sessions, so his goal was I wanted to get back to playing a musical instrument. Um, and then, sorry, lost my spot. So their OT sessions incorporated playing different musical instruments versus using manipulatives or pegs. In a setting like day rehab where multiple therapists will work with the patient, having a specific goal helps like a float therapist or a flex therapist plan their treatment session. Sometimes therapists only get a few minutes to prep for a session, and having a specific occupation listed on a goal can lead to a more client-focused treatment session, regardless of who's working with that patient, whether it's the primary therapist or someone who's just filling in for that moment.
That's so true. I do still work per diem, and when I see that fine motor goal of increasing or decreasing the time on the 9-hole peg test, I try so hard to keep my practice occupation based. So maybe I grab nuts and bolts, but those are limited in how motivating they are. But if I see that someone's trying to improve, their ability to push the keys on a keyboard or hold a drumstick, I'm going to make a much different selection in my activity choice. So
Yeah, and pegs have a place, and we need those sometimes within our practice, but having a solid occupation in mind just lets an OT be a lot more creative about breaking that task down into those component parts, doing that activity analysis. Like, oh, the kid wants to play a musical instrument. Let's say they wanted to play piano that day. Like, cool, what can we use? Like, maybe the piano is being used by someone else, but what other functional things can we pull out to work on moving the fingers dexterously?
Right. Can we play a computer game? Can we, yeah, are there other activities that use similar movements? Well, Rachel, thank you so much. At the Moxie OT podcast, we always want to make sure we provide an opportunity for our listeners to increase their Moxie. So if a clinician wanted to know more about the CAPE Pack, are there any resources you'd recommend?
So the Cape Pack for me was a great tool to start that conversation with patients and with the clinicians on my team about selecting goals that are client-centered for kiddos and just kind of helping kids get into the mindset of an occupation-focused goal. But those conversations can occur with a different tool or even without the use of a standardized tool. One of my goals for the project was to find an assessment to complement the pre-existing evaluation process that was in place within day rehab. And this led to my choice of the CAPE Pack. But if you're trying to find an occupation-based assessment, I think a great starting place is the Can Child website. It's out of Canada. Canada does great assessments. I'm a fan.
They sure do.
Yeah. Or if you're a member of AOTA, I always recommend people go to the online discussion forums. They're a really fantastic way to pose a question to the whole OT community that's part of AOTA, and people give really great responses and you get multiple feedback options.
I think
And
that's
it's also just
Commune OT, right? That's the name of that forum.
I think so. That sounds right.
I'll make sure I post it on
Yeah.
our website.
But it's just really fun to peruse the forum, and I always learn something. It's kind of like the nerdy equivalent of Reddit for OT, but it's good.
Well, thank you so much. Those are such great resources. I'll make sure that we post them on our Moxie OT website. And I just really want to thank you for your time today. And this was a lot of fun to think about all the different things that we can help kids get back to in their lives.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm always happy to chat about client-centered goals. So it's fun.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us for this motivating conversation with Rachel Vaughn on client-centered goals in the pediatric population. Rachel's research was presented in a poster presentation at the American Congress of Rehabilitation Medicine Conference here in Chicago. The Can Child website is an academic network that focuses research on children and youth with disabilities and their families. There you can find a myriad of pediatric evidence-based resources. For members of the AOTA community, the Commune OT online discussion forum hosts conversations based on the special interest sections. The Children's Assessment of Participation and Enjoyment and Preferences for Activities of Children, or CAPE Pack, is a good resource for developing occupation-based and client-centered goals with kiddos. You can purchase this assessment online. The Rehab Measures website is a useful resource in selecting new assessment tools. There you can find all of the psychometric properties of common rehabilitation assessments, as well as other helpful information, such as a description of the assessment and how to administer it. I'll provide a link to the Rehab Measures summary of the CAPE Pack and all of the resources I've discussed here on the Moxie OT website. If you want to be a part of the conversation, leave us your email address at moxieot.com. You can also find us on all of your favorite social media channels. The Moxie OT podcast was recorded in our home in the Avondale neighborhood of Chicago. This episode was produced by Brian Zira. Our intro music is courtesy of 13 Taco Studio. Technical assistance was provided by our dog Brody. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.